5 thugs cornered a quiet woman at a diner, demanding she apologize on her knees for disrespecting them. They had no idea she was a legendary Navy SEAL whose call sign struck fear into enemies across 3 continents. And what happened next reminded everyone that heroes walk among us. The neon sign of Nightlight Diner flickered against the rain-soaked asphalt, casting uneven shadows across the nearly empty parking lot. It was 2:30 in the morning on a Wednesday, the kind of hour when decent folks were home sleeping and only the restless wandered the highways. The steady drumming of rain on the diner's aluminum roof created a rhythm that masked the quiet conversations of late-night travelers seeking refuge from the storm. Sarah Mitchell pushed through the glass door, water dripping from her worn denim jacket onto the checkered linoleum floor. She moved with a subtle limp, favoring her left leg just enough for a careful observer to notice. Her short brown hair, streaked with premature gray, was plastered to her head from the rain. She wore no makeup, and her clothes spoke of someone who worked with her hands rather than behind a desk. The diner held perhaps a dozen customers scattered across red vinyl booths and chrome stools. Truck drivers nursed coffee and picked at pie, their CB radios crackling softly. A few night shift workers sat alone, lost in their phones or staring out rain-streaked windows. Sarah chose a corner booth near the back, automatically positioning herself where she could see both the entrance and the kitchen door. "What can I get you, honey?" The waitress, Debbie, approached with tired eyes and a coffee pot that had seen better days. Her name tag was crooked, and her uniform bore the stains of a long shift. "Coffee black, ham and cheese sandwich, please." Sarah's voice was quiet but clear, polite without invitation for conversation. She pulled a folded letter from her jacket pocket, the envelope worn soft from repeated handling. The return address showed an address in Colorado, and the handwriting belonged to someone who had taken great care with each word. Debbie poured the coffee and shuffled away, her orthopedic shoes squeaking against the floor. Sarah unfolded the letter for what must have been the 100th time, reading words she had memorized weeks ago. It was from Margaret Rodriguez, the mother of Private First Class Miguel Rodriguez, thanking her for something the letter did not specify, but clearly meant everything to the grieving woman. The diner's bell chimed as 5 men entered, their voices loud and their movements deliberate. They wore leather jackets over flannel shirts, their boots heavy against the floor. The leader, a large man with arms covered in tattoos, surveyed the room like he owned it. His companions followed his lead, spreading out to claim territory that was not theirs to take. "Hey, we want that booth," the large man called across the diner, pointing directly at Sarah's table. "That's our usual spot." Sarah looked up from her letter, meeting his gaze calmly. "I'm sorry, but I'm still eating." Her tone remained level, neither confrontational nor apologetic. The man's face darkened. "Did you hear me, lady? That's our table. Move." "I haven't finished my meal," Sarah replied, carefully folding the letter and returning it to her pocket. "There are plenty of other seats available." One of the men, thin with nervous energy, approached her table and deliberately knocked over the sugar dispenser. Granules scattered across the surface, some falling onto the letter she had just put away. "Oops," he said with a smirk that held no apology. Debbie hurried over, her face flushed with anxiety. "Ma'am, maybe you could just... These gentlemen are regular customers. They've been coming here for years." Sarah looked at the waitress, recognizing the fear in her eyes. She had seen that look before, in places far from home, in faces that pleaded for peace rather than justice. Without argument, she began gathering her things, leaving a $10 bill on the table that more than covered her modest order. As she stood to leave, the largest man stepped into her path. "Now hold on there, soldier girl." His eyes had noticed something others had missed. The way she carried herself, the automatic way she had chosen her seat, the bearing that never quite left those who had served. "Where's the apology for being rude to us?" "I wasn't rude," Sarah said quietly. "I was simply finishing my meal." "Sounds rude to me," another man chimed in, this one younger with cruel eyes. "Real rude. Maybe you need to learn some manners." The circle was forming now, casual but deliberate. Sarah recognized the tactics even in this civilian setting. The positioning, the verbal escalation designed to justify whatever came next. The other customers in the diner suddenly found their coffee cups fascinating, their phones urgent, their conversations elsewhere. Chuck, the night manager, emerged from behind the counter. He was a soft man in his 50s who had clearly decided long ago that avoiding trouble was more important than doing what was right. Look, miss, these boys are good customers, real good customers. Maybe you could Just what? Sarah asked, her voice still calm but with something harder underneath. Just apologize for the misunderstanding and be on your way, Chuck suggested, his eyes not quite meeting hers. The large man smiled at this support from authority. See? Even Chuck knows you were out of line. He placed his hand on Sarah's table, leaning close enough that she could smell the combination of cheap cologne and old beer. So how about that apology? On your knees would be nice. Sarah stood slowly, her movements controlled and precise. The letter from Miguel's mother crinkled slightly in her pocket as she rose. She looked around the diner at the faces turned away, at the manager who had chosen the easy path, at the 5 men who had mistaken quiet dignity for weakness. I think there's been enough misunderstanding for one evening, she said, her voice carrying a note that made the smart man in the group shift uncomfortably. But the leader was not a smart man. He was a man who had spent years believing that size and aggression could solve any problem, who had never learned that some battles are lost before they begin. He shoved her, hard enough to send her stumbling backward against the booth. Her coffee cup shattered on the floor, the dark liquid spreading across the linoleum like spilled secrets. The diner fell completely silent except for the rain and the soft hiss of the coffee machine. Sarah steadied herself against the table, her hands flat on its surface. When she looked up, something had changed in her eyes. Something that spoke of places where respect was earned with blood and dignity was not negotiable. That, she said very quietly, was a mistake. The silence stretched across the diner like a held breath. Sarah remained perfectly still, her hands flat against the table where she had caught herself. The spilled coffee continued to spread across the floor, dark tendrils reaching toward the boots of the men who surrounded her. In that moment of quiet, something fundamental had shifted in the air. Now that's more like it, the large man said, satisfaction evident in his voice. See how easy that was? Maybe next time you'll think twice about giving us attitude. His companions laughed, the sound harsh against the gentle patter of rain on the roof. The youngest of the group, emboldened by his leader's success, stepped closer. Yeah, maybe now you'll show some respect to your betters. Sarah straightened slowly, brushing coffee droplets from her jacket with movements that were precise and controlled. Her breathing remained steady, her posture erect in a way that spoke of years of discipline. To most observers, she appeared calm. Only someone with training would notice the subtle shift in her stance, the way her weight settled evenly on both feet despite her injured leg. Chuck, the manager, cleared his throat nervously. Look, folks, maybe we should all just— Shut it, Chuck, the leader snapped. We're teaching this lady some manners, something her parents obviously forgot to do. He turned back to Sarah, his smile predatory. Now about that apology. On your knees, like I said. The bell above the entrance chimed again, and a man in his late 50s entered, shaking rain from his jacket. Colonel James Harris, though he wore civilian clothes, carried himself with the unmistakable bearing of career military. His gray hair was precisely trimmed, his posture straight despite the late hour. He had been driving home from his volunteer shift at the Veterans Hospital when the storm forced him to seek shelter. Harris took in the scene immediately. The woman standing alone surrounded by 5 men, the broken coffee cup on the floor, the other customers studiously avoiding eye contact. His trained gaze lingered on Sarah for a moment longer than the others. Something about her stillness, her controlled breathing, the way she held her head triggered a recognition that went beyond simple observation. Gentlemen, Harris said, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being heard. Perhaps you might consider leaving the lady alone. The thin man who had knocked over the sugar turned to face this new interruption. Mind your own business, old man. This doesn't concern you. When I see 5 grown men intimidating one woman, it concerns me greatly, Harris replied, stepping further into the diner. His eyes met Sarah's for a brief moment, and he saw something there that made him look more carefully at her bearing, her posture, the way she remained motionless under pressure. The leader laughed, a sound devoid of humor. Another hero, huh? Tell you what, Grandpa, Walk back out that door and pretend you never saw anything. We're just having a friendly conversation." "That doesn't look friendly to me," Harris said. As he spoke, he noticed more details about the woman, the way she had automatically chosen the corner booth, the manner in which she kept her hands visible and ready, the fact that despite being outnumbered and seemingly helpless, she showed no signs of panic or pleading. Sarah remained silent, but something in her stance shifted almost imperceptibly. For just a moment, Harris caught a glimpse of the professional warrior beneath the civilian clothes. The recognition hit him like a physical blow. "You know what?" the youngest thug said, his voice rising with anger. "I'm tired of all this talking." He grabbed Sarah's shoulder roughly, intending to force her to her knees. The reaction was instant and startling. Sarah's left hand moved in a blur, intercepting his wrist with surgical precision. The young man found his arm bent at an uncomfortable angle, completely neutralized by what appeared to be the gentlest of touches. For a split second, the mask of helpless civilian slipped entirely. Then just as quickly, Sarah released him and stepped back, resuming her position of apparent vulnerability. But Harris had seen enough. The movement had been textbook, military close-quarters combat, executed with the kind of muscle memory that came from years of intensive training. "What the hell was that?" the young man gasped, rubbing his wrist. "Lucky grab," his leader growled, but his eyes had narrowed. "Grab her again, Tommy. Harder this time." "Maybe we should call the police," Debbie suggested weakly from behind the counter, her hand hovering over the phone. "No need for that," Chuck said quickly. "We can handle this ourselves. Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. These gentlemen were here first, and you're causing a disturbance." Harris stepped forward. "She's causing a disturbance? 5 men surrounding one woman, and she's the problem?" The leader's attention shifted to Harris, his patience clearly wearing thin. "I told you to mind your own business, old man. Last warning." But Harris was studying Sarah more intently now, pieces falling into place. The bearing, the controlled responses, the way she had handled that wrist grab. And then he saw it. As she reached to adjust her jacket, her sleeve pulled back slightly, revealing the edge of what looked like a tattoo on her wrist. In the harsh fluorescent light of the diner, Harris caught just a glimpse of what appeared to be a trident. His breath caught. He had heard stories, legends really, told in hushed tones in officer clubs and briefing rooms. Stories of operations so classified they barely existed. Of a female operator whose call sign was spoken with reverence by those few who knew. Looking at the woman standing before him, her age, her bearing, the professional calm under pressure, Harris felt the pieces of an impossible puzzle clicking into place. "You have no idea who you're dealing with," he said quietly, his voice carrying a new weight. The leader laughed harshly. "Right. And I suppose you're going to tell us she's some kind of secret agent or something?" Harris said nothing, but his eyes remained fixed on Sarah. She met his gaze for a moment, and in that brief exchange, he saw confirmation of what he barely dared to believe. The situation was spiraling toward a conclusion that none of the antagonists could imagine. The woman they saw as easy prey was something far different, and Harris realized he was about to witness something extraordinary. The leader, misinterpreting Harris's silence as defeat, turned back to Sarah with renewed confidence. "Enough games. Boys, hold her arms. Let's finish this lesson in respect." As hands reached for her, Sarah's eyes grew cold as winter steel. The time for restraint was rapidly coming to an end. As the hands reached toward her, Sarah made a decision that would change everything in the nightlight diner. Instead of the explosive response her training demanded, she chose a different path. With deliberate slowness, she reached up and removed the simple leather bracelet from her wrist. The tattooed trident of the Navy SEALs was revealed in its full glory, dark ink stark against her pale skin. Below it, smaller but equally significant, were the crossed anchors of special operations and a date that Colonel Harris recognized immediately. "Stop," Harris commanded, his voice carrying the authority of decades in command. "Everyone stop right now." The leader paused, his hand inches from Sarah's arm. "What now, old man?" Harris stepped forward, his eyes fixed on the tattoo with something approaching reverence. "That's a SEAL trident. And those dates—" His voice trailed off as recognition dawned completely. "Your shadow." The diner fell absolutely silent. Even the coffee machine seemed to stop its gentle hissing. Sarah looked at Harris with surprise and something that might have been relief. After years of anonymity, of being invisible, someone finally saw her for who she truly was. Shadow? The leader scoffed, though uncertainty had crept into his voice. What kind of nonsense? Operation Red Storm, Harris said quietly, his voice filled with awe. February 2019. 17 hostages held by insurgents in a compound outside Kandahar. Officially, it never happened. Unofficially, ... He looked around the diner, ensuring he had everyone's attention. Officially, it never happened because the mission was so classified that most people will never know it saved dozens of American lives. Sarah remained silent, but her posture had straightened imperceptibly. Harris continued, his voice growing stronger. One operator went in alone. One, through defensive positions that should have been impossible to breach. 17 hostages came out alive because of what happened that night. The operator who made it possible was known only by their call sign. He looked directly at Sarah. Shadow? The youngest thug, Tommy, had gone pale. You're making this up. Am I? Harris reached into his wallet and pulled out a faded photograph. It showed him in desert camouflage, standing with a group of officers. This was taken 3 days after Red Storm. We were briefing command on what we witnessed. He held up the photo so others could see. I may not have been there, but I debriefed every person who was. The legend of Shadow was born that night. Sarah finally spoke, her voice quiet but clear. 18 hostages, sir. One was missed in the initial count. Harris's eyes widened. The correction confirmed everything. Only someone who had been there, who had counted each rescued life, would know that detail. The atmosphere in the diner had completely transformed. The truck drivers had turned in their seats, sensing they were witnessing something extraordinary. Debbie stood frozen behind the counter, her hand covering her mouth. Even Chuck had emerged from his office, drawn by the sudden change in the room's energy. The leader of the group stood paralyzed, his worldview crashing down around him. But you're just a woman, Sarah asked, a slight smile touching her lips for the first time that evening. Yeah, funny how that works. One of the truck drivers, a burly man with calloused hands, slowly stood up. Ma'am, he said, his voice rough with emotion, I don't know the details of what you did, but I know what it means to serve. He snapped to attention and rendered a perfect salute. The gesture rippled through the diner like a wave. Another customer stood, then another. Even Debbie came around the counter, tears streaming down her face. Harris, his own eyes bright with unshed tears, moved to position himself beside Sarah. Ladies and gentlemen, you are in the presence of true American heroism. This woman has given more in service to our country than most of us can comprehend. The leader of the group looked around desperately, seeing his world of assumptions crumbling. We didn't know. That's exactly the point, Sarah said gently. You didn't know, but you decided who I was based on what you saw, not who I am. She looked around the diner at the faces now filled with respect and shame. I'm not telling you this story to make you feel bad. I'm telling you because there are people like me everywhere. Veterans who served quietly, who came home to regular jobs and regular lives. We're your mechanics and your teachers, your store clerks and your neighbors. Tommy, the youngest attacker, had tears running down his cheeks. Ma'am, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. Sarah nodded. Apology accepted, but make it mean something. Next time you see someone you think you understand, remember this moment. Chuck stepped forward, his face red with embarrassment. Ma'am, your meals are free here, for life, and I promise you, nothing like this will ever happen in my establishment again. I appreciate that, Sarah said, but what I'd really like is for you to put up a sign. Something that reminds people that heroes don't always look like what we expect. Harris pulled out his phone. With your permission, I'd like to make a call. There are people who should know that Shadow is safe and well. People who have wondered for years what happened to the legend. Sarah considered this for a moment, then nodded. Make your call, Colonel. It's time to stop hiding. As Harris dialed, the leader of the group approached Sarah hesitantly. His swagger was completely gone, replaced by genuine remorse. Ma'am, there's nothing I can say that would be enough, but I want you to know that I'll never forget this night. and I'll never make the same mistake again." "Then this was worth it," Sarah replied. "All of it." The truck driver who had first saluted spoke up. "Ma'am, if it's not too forward, could we, could we buy you dinner? A proper dinner?" Sarah looked around the transformed diner, at faces that had changed from hostility to respect, from ignorance to understanding. For the first time in years, she felt truly seen, truly valued for who she was, rather than judged for who she appeared to be. "I'd be honored," she said. As the group began to rearrange tables and chairs, making room for an impromptu celebration of service and sacrifice, Harris finished his call. He approached Sarah with a smile that spoke of bridges rebuilt and honors finally acknowledged. "Shadow," he said, "welcome home." Outside, the rain continued to fall, washing the night clean. But inside the Nightlight Diner, something more important was happening. People were learning, growing, and discovering that heroes walk among us every day, usually unrecognized and always deserving of our respect. The true lesson of the evening was simple but profound. Never judge a person by their appearance, for you never know what courage lies beneath the surface, what sacrifices they have made, or what honor they carry in their heart. In a world quick to assume and slow to understand, sometimes it takes a moment of recognition to remind us all of what really matters: respect, dignity, and the quiet heroism of those who serve.